So the iPhone 17 is finally here, and even though it might look the same, there's a whole lot new going on inside, and in this video we're going to find out if all the upgrades make it a better option than the Samsung Galaxy S25. Now, like all our comparisons, this will be divided into 5 sections, so we'll talk about the displays, the specs, the cameras, the build, and ultimately talk about which one you should buy. So to kick things off, let's talk about displays because that's one of the bigger upgrades for the iPhone 17 this year. Now, the Samsung Galaxy S25 has a 6.2-inch AMOLED display with a resolution of 2340 by 1080, giving it a pixel density of 416. And one of the key features, the key advantages the S25 had over the last iPhone was its 120Hz refresh rate display. Now, moving on to the iPhone 17, you have a bigger 6.3-inch Super Retina XDR display with a higher resolution of 2622 by 1206, giving it the same pixel density as before at 460. But the biggest change this year is the 120Hz refresh rate ProMotion display. And that was one of the bigger letdowns of the last gen base iPhone, that even though the panel itself was good, the lower 60Hz refresh rate really limited it. And now that Apple's finally caught up, I believe that it's given it a little bit of an edge over the S25. Now, Samsung displays have always been more vivid and more saturated, giving it a better look to the eye, whereas the iPhones have always been a bit more subdued and a bit richer in contrast, which still is the case here, but I feel that the slightly bigger display and the higher refresh rate gives the iPhone an edge over the S25 this year. So moving on, let's talk about specs. Now, the iPhone 17 has Apple's new A19 chip with an Apple GPU and a hexa-core CPU, whereas the S25 has the Snapdragon 8 Elite with the Adreno 830 GPU and an octa-core CPU with 12 gigs of RAM. Now, the iPhone still has 8 gigs of RAM, but the bigger differentiator this year is storage. So the S25 starts at 128 gigs, go all the way up to 512, whereas now the iPhone 17 starts at 256 and goes all the way up to 512. Now, this is a big change because the base storage is higher than the S25, even though they both cost the same. Now, the S25 on the other hand has a larger battery at 4000 mAh compared to only 3692 on the iPhone, and both the phones are IP68 certified. Now, one might argue that the S25 with a higher RAM will give you a smoother and a faster user experience, but that is not the case at all. They're both quite optimized with the OSs and you barely notice any difference. The iPhone 17 will be running iOS 26 on launch, and the S25 runs One UI 8, which is heavily based on Android 16. So it really comes down to your preference of OS, if you prefer iOS or if you prefer Android, because the hardware on both of these phones perfectly complement their softwares. But moving on to cameras, this is where the iPhone 17 is finally hitting back on the S25. So the S25 has a 50 megapixel main wide sensor with a 12 megapixel ultra wide and a 10 megapixel telephoto lens, whereas the iPhone on the other hand has the same 48 megapixel wide sensor but now has a bigger 48 megapixel ultra wide sensor. And even though it does not have a third lens, you can still get a 2x telephoto picture, which is basically cropped out of the 48 megapixel main sensor and zoomed in. So there's no hardware here, which the Samsung does have. It's essentially a clever marketing gimmick from Apple saying that you can have 3 different cameras in your pocket, even though if it's just 2 lenses itself. Now, coming on to video, this is where the S25 still has a higher number on paper, so it can do 8K video up to 30 frames per second compared to only 4K up to 60 on the iPhone. And coming to slow-mo, again, this is pretty neck and neck, so both the phones can do 1080 up to 240 frames per second. The S25 can do HDR10+ compared to just HDR video on the iPhone, but you can take spatial video on the iPhone and play it on your Vision Pro headset. But the key difference this year is dual video recording on the iPhone. So essentially you can take videos from both the rear and the front camera at the same time and sort of have that moment right on the go, which is pretty clever and it's a good feature to have this year on the iPhone. The iPhone also has a cinematic mode, and in general I feel the video quality of iPhones have always been better than other devices, even though they might lack the overall megapixel or the resolution on paper, but the video processing on the iPhone has always been better than competitors. Now, coming up to the front, the S25 has a 12 megapixel sensor that can do 4K up to 60 FPS, whereas the iPhone 17 has a new square sensor at 18 megapixels that can also do 4K up to 60 FPS, but the key feature is center stage, which allows you to essentially take a landscape picture without rotating your phone from the front camera, which is pretty cool. So this really comes down to preference in terms of how you like your pictures and videos, because the image processing on both the phones is going to be amazing and pretty good. They're pretty neck and neck in that, but I feel if you want a device that has more saturation, more color, then the S25 is your better bet. But if you want an overall more subdued, richer in contrast, with better dynamic range, and a device that does better video, then the iPhone 17 is going to be the one. Now, last but not the least, let's talk about build. Both the phones are made out of aluminum, and the S25 comes in icy blue, mint, navy, silver shadow, pink, gold, coral red, and blue black, and will set you back $799, whereas the iPhone comes in black, white, sage, lavender, and mist blue, and will also set you back $799. But the key difference is that the base storage on the iPhone is 256, whereas the base storage on the S25 is only 128 gigs. So you got to keep that in mind when you're looking at these phones. But which one should you buy? Now, my recommendation and response is going to be split into two parts. First being if you're switching between the two, and then the second being if you're upgrading from a predecessor. Now, if you're switching, let's say, from an iPhone and you want to go to Samsung, then the S25 is the perfect phone to get into the market. I do understand that it's only an evolution over the S24, but it still packs enough new features, and it's a good iteration of that previous Samsung phone that makes it a worthy upgrade. And the same can be said for the iPhone, if not more. I think that this is one of the best base iPhones we have had ever, because it's a bigger display, better cameras, and you finally have the 120Hz refresh rate, which was really holding back the base iPhone. So if you're looking to get into the Apple ecosystem, then the iPhone 17 is probably the best value for money iPhone right now. Now, if you're looking to upgrade from a predecessor, let's say you're on the S24 and you want to go to the S25, then I would recommend holding off for the S26 or the next generation, because it's only small iterations, and even though they've sort of gotten to a point where they can only do so much with the phone, it's still worth waiting the extra year. And the same goes for the iPhone 17, because if you're on the iPhone 16, then I don't believe it's a big enough upgrade to warrant the cost of buying a new one. But if you are in a contract, or if you are owning any of the previous gens, let's say iPhone 15 or before, or the S23 or before, then these probably are big enough upgrades to finally change and get the new ones. But that is pretty much it. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, give it a big thumbs up and stay tuned for more. Until then, please like, comment, and subscribe. Peace.